violence and things like that, and it escalated things and may have led to the Civil War. There's a lot of things. So yeah, there could be negative impacts of it, but we can't not take the right stand because we're afraid that some bully in Washington is going to do it. And before I actually participated in this, I wanted some assurance from Central. They were confident that they had the support of at least a good portion of the immigrant community here, because they're the ones that are taking the chances. I didn't want to come out and take those chances for them. And when those 1,400 were sent, that night I actually woke up really thinking about it. Like, what have we done? This could be a bad thing. And yeah, there could be some punitive measures taken. But if that's where we're at, if we're living in a banana republic, then we got to address that, and we have to address that on a separate issue. But we can't not pass a law of what we feel is a moral imperative because we're afraid of what they're going to do. And I believe that the immigrant community has taken that stand, and at least as best that we can ascertain through their activists who are here. And it's a difficult situation, and I'm actually, of all the arguments, that's the strongest one that makes me worried about it. Are we going to draw punitive measures from the federal government because we are the first one that passes it by a ballot initiative? But we just can't live in fear, or the banana republic is inevitability.
That's right.
We can't live in fear. And as people were talking, someone sent this to me that Sheriff HONSAL, if you really want to help us, trust us and vote yes for Measure K. Question from the audience?
I have a question. First, I just wanted to say that it sounds like baloney to me that you're worried about what would happen to people if this measure passed, as opposed to what's happening now. I think it's a distraction to say, because you haven't supported any other safety things for people who are undocumented or their families in the past. So I don't know why you're saying, well, I would support it if, and you need to support Measure K. But my question was to Sheriff HONSAL, you say you don't work with ICE except every time someone's booked in the jail, even for low level, just misdemeanor arrest or something, your fingerprints get sent to Homeland Security and ICE. But one of the joint task force that caused terror in Fortuna a few months ago, and your department is sharing release dates if you don't work with ICE.
Mm-hmm. So that was a couple of years ago, where the drug task force, which is overseen by the sheriff's office, but it's a multi-agency drug task force, did serve a warrant in the city of Fortuna, and ICE was there, and they did come for translation purposes. Okay, that was wrong, and we're not doing that anymore. Okay, it's one of the things that Renee brought up, and it's one thing that we talked about in our meetings, and so that does not foster goodwill in the community. Once ICE shows up, then everyone is essentially terrorized in that circumstance. Okay, so it's a lesson learned at that point in time, and so we are no longer using it. And since it's a part of the policy that we will not use, ICE as translators, so that's not something that we will do. As far as release dates go, we talk about release dates. Release dates are public information, so anyone can know release dates. But when we talk about ICE, when it's specifically for those offenses that are outlined in SB 54, serious or violent felons, is when we'll communicate with ICE via the release dates.
I have a question for the sheriff.
Yeah, I'm going to respond really quick. So the sheriff just said that what happened in Fortuna was a learning lesson for the sheriff's department. I think that's a really hard lesson to learn for the families who were terrorized by what happened. I think this right here is a learning lesson. To have your community to come forward to you and plead with you to please support us. Instead of learning from tragedy of a failure, we should learn from the voices of the community. us right now, previous engagements. But Monica has a response or a question for the sheriff.
I just want to have a question for you, Sheriff. What's the real reason why you don't support Measure K? You claim that Measure K protects criminals, but Measure K does not protect criminals. They're still going to be convicted. They're still going to go to jail or serve their time. It's not like they're going to go into jail and disappear like after. Yeah, I still come pick them up, but in Humboldt County, what is the real reason why you don't support Measure K besides that? Which is, I mean, it does not protect criminals.
Well, you see, in my opinion, that's exactly what it does. It protects criminals, because those are the people that we actually communicate with ICE about. And we're talking about, again, the people that we have actually cooperated with ICE for the last 3 have been tied to drug trafficking here in Humboldt County. Drug trafficking is a huge thing. Heroin and methamphetamine is an epidemic here in Humboldt County. I think we all see the ill effects of these hardcore drugs. Everything that's being produced and transported and sold here is coming from Mexico. Okay? And listen to me. No, please just keep an open mind here, okay? Keep an open mind and listen to me when I say that. Okay, this is a verified information, okay? That drug trafficking organizations out of Mexico, and you know, you can choose not to believe me, but this is the information that I'm confident about, okay, are coming in here into the droves right now. We have taken off more heroin and methamphetamine here in Humboldt County this year than we have the last 3 years. Okay, 30+ pounds of heroin and methamphetamine, okay, have been taken off the streets. Okay, and these are in correlations with drug trafficking organizations out of Mexico. I'm sorry if that makes people feel bad about that. Okay.
I don't think it makes people feel bad. I just think that people don't like when we generalize what immigration is to one place.
I agree. I agree with you. Okay, but when we talk about the people that we have cooperated with ICE over, it has been drug trafficking. It's been people that are associated with drug trafficking, and so those are people that we've turned over, and that's been a part of the serious or violent felonies that we're looking at. And so in the state of California, there's not. These people could be federally prosecuted and they go 10 years in federal prison. Okay, they can be. Sometimes they get prosecuted locally. Okay, and they only get a couple years, 2-3 years. And at that point in time, and when they've been convicted and released, I want to communicate with ICE over these people, because drugs has affected Humboldt County. And if these people are part of drug trafficking organizations, I don't want them here. This is our ability to then turn them over and be a part of the drug trafficking.
But Sheriff, is drug trafficking under the auspices of ICE? I mean, I assume you would just soon work with the DEA. That's the agency that works with them. So why bring immigration into it? If these are hardened, serious criminals, if there is a serious crime situation, then they should be in jail, not sent to another country. They can't prosecute them because they don't have the jurisdiction to prosecute for anything that happens here. If these people are dangerous, then they have to be put away here for as long as they can be put away.
Well, the fact is, the state of California, we don't prosecute, or we don't hold people in jail for this kind of offense.
For drug trafficking, I'd be very shocked.
Yeah, well, people don't go to state prison anymore over this kind of stuff.
Okay, well then you bring in the DEA and they make federal charges. If it crosses a border, that is DEA territory right there. And if they for some reason need to work with ICE, then they can do that in their thing. Although I don't understand why ICE is brought into it at all. ICE has actually blown warrants around the country because they aren't adequately trained in this kind of stuff.
I'm saying that those are the reasons why I turned this, and there's only been 3 of them over the last 2 years. 3 people that over the last 2 years that I've turned over to ICE. So what was that?
I thought it was a drug epidemic. Why are there only 3 people, man?
Well, those are the people that qualify that ICE sort of decided to come pick up. So again, just because ICE has requested a hold on people, they don't necessarily come and pick people up.
But then what happens to them? They're deported. Then what?
So I think we're conflating arguments here, is what Eric is saying. Is that we began this talk from the sheriff saying that we don't want to use a tactic of fear to pass laws or to make people do certain things. I think bringing up the rhetoric of drug trafficking is passing and playing into fear tactics.
Right.
try to get people to do certain things. And I do not, as a citizen of America, don't appreciate that because it hasn't led to good policy. And that's what Eric is saying, that we don't need to be talking about drug trafficking. What we're talking about is immigration. And if the DEA wants to work with you, that's completely different. We don't need ICE to be able to communicate. We're not conflating arguments and we're not using fear tactics for the rest of our 20 minutes here. Thank you. So the next question is coming from a community member, Sochi.
My question was kind of relevant to something that was mentioned earlier about how you said that you weren't going to use, the ICE to interpret like if that case happened, what would you do for Fortuna? I just want to say that I don't think that was a decision that was made by you personally or like your department, but SB54 I feel had an influence on you all. So in the same way that SB54 had an influence on you making that decision to not use that ICE to interpret things anymore or translate, I think Measure K can do the same way to influence you in larger aspects and keeping families together and bringing the humanity value back to your community. I've been a community member here since I was 5 years old, and myself being an immigrant, luckily I have documents, but I can also see a lot of my family, a lot of my friends, people I went to school with who don't have documents, and just see how they've been affected by this and by the police presence. And because of that case that happened in Virginia, people are now even more afraid to come to you all. Regardless of what you're saying now, your actions speak louder than what you're saying now. And that was a huge mistake, and I'm glad you're not going to do it again because you've been in this in some way. I'm pretty sure. I hope that you can vote yes for Measure K and help out make the community safer for all of us. It makes you have a better interaction with the community that you should want to have as a protecting. Part of your job is to protect the community, and I think you can't do that unless the community trusts you. And so I think that your actions speak larger than what you say, and voting yes on Measure K will definitely help.
I appreciate your opinion. Thank you.
Question from the audience?
I have two statements for my question. I want to say no one is illegal, and I'll hold on for my understanding. This is for Sheriff HONSAL. I just wanted to refer to something that was talked about earlier. Are you understanding that Measure K will give a parent or parents the choice of where their children go in case they, the parent or parents, get deported?
Well, yeah, I understand. I think the spirit of that.
It's like in the written. It's not like an essence of it. It's like in the measure.
I understand the intent of the language in this about separating parents and parents having influence of where their children go and having
The right to choose where their child will go if they get separated from them.
Right, exactly. And I don't have any control over that. That's Department of Health and Human Services. And I'm not sure, how immigration law intersects with, 300 W&I and how all of this would work when it comes to the Department of Health and Human Services. And so it's one of those complex fields where federal law, state law, children rights, parental rights all intersect. And so I believe that if someone has has a document that says where their child should go in the event that they are incapable or no longer capable of being their parent at that particular time, I think, and as long as the state recognizes that, I think.
Not necessarily.
Well.
Sorry. I just want to clarify, not necessarily even deported, but detained. Like when an officer detains someone, at that point, I believe I don't know Measure K front to back, but I think at detainment, a parent has the choice of where their child will go. So that's at the law enforcement level. That's not even ICE level.
Okay. And it also, if someone is detained, okay, and we have arrested them under state law, okay, if they're driving while licensed, let's just say, and we have to arrest them, okay, and they have a child in the vehicle, that we then detain that child, we call up child welfare, and child welfare then takes custody of that child. Then child welfare then places that child with a known parent, guardian. That's social services. Okay, we as law enforcement do not place children. That's not our job, and we shouldn't do that. Okay, because we don't know all the rules behind things. We don't follow up with where children are placed. So if we just randomly say a father, is arrested and then a father chooses to have the child go to his mother, okay? There may be a parental right issue there, where the mother wants the child, needs the child, has rights to the child, but now as law enforcement officer, I place that child with the grandmother. That's why we don't do that. That's why Department of Health Human Services gets called, and they make the determination, they do the follow-up, they do all the documentation to make sure that the child is taken care of, and then goes to the appropriate parent.
One of the great things that Centro del Pueblo as an organization has been doing for the community is educating the immigrant community about the necessity for having powers of attorney, like packets of things in case something happens. It's sad to even have to think about that, but packets of things, phone contact information for relatives, and a power of attorney given to somebody who can establish guardianship. And in most cases, those have been honored. The cases I was referring to were situations where the children were citizens, the parents not. Parents were deported, tried to arrange for reunification. Social workers decide it's best interest of a citizen child to remain in the United States, and our policy simply, as a policy statement, says that's not your call. And that's, if the parents choose that, that's fine, and some parents do. But it's just not their call. And it's a general policy statement. We don't run afoul of it. The state allows for the separation of children if there's abuse and neglect. We don't get in the way of that. We can't override state law. We wouldn't. If there's evidence of abuse and neglect, obviously any parent, any child needs to be protected from that. But that's, and there are some other situations too. If the kid is a problem, criminal habit, and the parents can't control them, those types of things. And state law would kick in for that. We're just saying as a general provision, that the parental choices should be honored, and Centro del Pueblo is doing well to educate the immigrant community about how to best prepare for that very sad possibility.
Because Measure K does have these provisions to protect children, to make sure that the families are the most important aspect of our laws and our policies. Because going forward, we don't want to see Jim Crow repeated. Going forward, we don't want to see the segregation completely still happening, where voices are silenced in our community. Do you have another question from the community, Fabian?
So, my question derives from your answer to Monica's question, and specifically your statement about why you're not supporting Measure K, which is because you believe that it's going to protect criminals. Sheriff, I urge you to, when making that statement of why you're not going to support this, to take into consideration that in our system, in the federal government, the way our system is run here in the United States, it systematically oppresses certain communities. So we want to take it on your argument about how some of these people who are criminals are going to be protected. Systematically, they're kept in those positions of being labeled as criminals, of that rhetoric of being labeled as criminals, because of how they're oppressed in our system, because they're kept in the cycle of oppression. They keep into those actions that you, as yourself, can label as criminal activities, because that's all they can do to help their families, because our system oppresses people of color, our system oppresses those communities. And Sheriff, I really urge you, next time when you explain why you're not supporting Measure K, you need to take that into consideration of how our system treats people of color when they are living in our country. My question to you is, when you see already that the system that is supported by the federal government oppresses certain communities because of the way the system is structured, will you listen to our voices and recognize our knowledge of why we're supporting Measure K and why we urge you to support Measure K? Will you please fight against that very system by supporting Measure K? Because when you took the oath as sheriff, you took an oath to protect our community, not to be an agent to a controversial executive office at Washington, D.C., and you are not taking an oath to defend a broken and systematically oppressive system. Because my father took the very same oath when he became a sheriff deputy in the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. And himself supporting a measurement like this is not just a step closer to progress in a big city, but in a country where there are more small towns and more rural communities than large metropolis cities, by a sheriff of a small rural community, if supporting Measure K, you're not just making an impact in a small community such as Arcata, but you're making an impact that the whole country is going to recognize. Because if they see you as a sheriff of a rural community taking the steps forward into a more progressive future, you are going to make that impact. So now understanding how our system systematically oppresses certain communities, ignore the fact that you're going to say that Measure K is only to protect criminals. Will you support Measure K, not based on policy, but based on moral actions?
So thank you. I appreciate the impassioned, opinion, and I'm here to listen. Okay, so I appreciate that viewpoint. It's not going to change my mind at this point, but I do appreciate your opinion, and it was well constructed. Thank you.
So I'm wondering though, if we're just here to listen, how will we ever create changes? I'm wondering if we're here to listen, how do we listen to the voices that are silenced by you not supporting them, the voices? If we're here to listen, how do we fully get the picture of the community, the voices of our people, if they're not allowed to come out of the shadows because they don't have something like Measure K in law? So if we're here to listen, Sheriff, I'm very confused at why you have blinders on your ears or earplugs in. So, do we have any more questions from the community before I pose another question?
Just okay.
Yes, okay! Measure K on the way, baby. That's what I'm saying. Question? Oh, we have. I'm seeing.
Okay.
Pointing.
I'm not sure you are looking, okay.
No,
I have a very simple question. So you said that you are no longer going to use ICE as interpreters, which is clearly a good decision. The question is that a policy of yours which could be changed by the next sheriff?
No, it actually is worked into SB 54 as well. But one thing that also we're changing, okay, and this is through meetings and talking to people too, is we oftentimes have used children to interpret. Okay, so obviously, we can see that as an issue, and in a desperate time, desperate measures, those kind of things where we need immediate information, we use that, and so that's something that we're working against. And we don't use children as interpreters, unless it's a life safety issue. So we're doing our best to try and have bilingual officers and deputies work for us, and as well as we use the language line through AT&T to try and communicate better. So it's something that again we're learning as we're going through, and we want to keep that dialogue open. And if we do something that we can improve upon, we're going to continue to do that.
Thank you. I do appreciate keeping the dialogue open, because that's how we create open, true policies. But again, reiterating the statement, how do we keep our policies open and sharing of voices if there's certain voices who do not feel like they can access those policies or the line of communication? So we are wrapping up. I have time for one last question, and then I'm going to pose it to our panel just to summarize how Measure K will affect them. So the last question, right here, perfect.
So I am confused because I hear what you say, but I don't feel where you are. And it feels like you are very attached to the system. You say that you want to protect the community and make our immigrant community members feel safe. And yet, I heard you say many times, I'll say several times, 3 at least, when you were quoting out of SB 54, that you, under these circumstances, I can call ICE. That really smacked to me of like, that's something I can do. Like, you have an attachment to that part of the system, which is just totally illegal anyway. I mean, if you, and so my question is, would you be willing to go inside and look at what it is you really want and what you're doing and what you would like to gift this community from the position that you hold? You'd be willing to reconsider where you're coming from.
I'm always looking at learning, I'm always looking at, how we do things, and so I'm constantly evaluating that. So, it's something that I'm always looking at.
I'm asking you to go deeper.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, starting with Eric, just kind of summarize your feelings of today, what you would like to leave our general public with. Last words.
Well, I want to thank the sheriff for coming. I know this, you're kind of walking into a situation where it wasn't, most people disagree with you, in this room. I don't know what's going to happen in 2 weeks. We don't really have polls or anything. But whatever happens, however it works, this discussion isn't going to stop. There's going to be a lot of other issues. And so I want to thank you, and I want to encourage you to continue the dialogue, whether Measure K passes or fails. I just want to say that, again, the reason that we took the position not to allow for any communication, even for criminal activities, we don't believe that a person who's been convicted who is undocumented should be treated any differently from anyone else. It's, whatever would face a citizen, that's what the undocumented person should face. Once they've done their time, they've paid their debt according to the law, and that should be it. There shouldn't be an extra thing that applies to, like, I'm assuming 1 in 1,000 people who are in the local prison. And, we obviously don't have a lot of, it doesn't apply to a lot of murderers or child molesters because most of them wouldn't be in the county prison, so you wouldn't be sending a release date because you're not going to know what it is even necessarily. We're talking about, I noticed when the press release came and it appeared on Lost Coast Outpost that all of the charges were for drugs, and I don't want to downplay that. But because that's who's going to be in the county prison. I believe if it's over 6 months, it has to be a state prison thing. And so we're talking about a punishment of 6 months and a deportation, which is more serious than a 6 month a 6 month prison sentence. I understand, that maybe some of these people are part of drug trafficking and the rest, and if that's the case, then I don't see the point in sending them back to where they're going to rejoin the very people that sent them here to begin with. So I'm not understanding the logic to it, and that's why we did not allow, for the exceptions. That's why we passed it and wanted to go a little bit beyond SB 54, which I felt was a watered down compromise because of politics of, you don't want to defend criminals. And we're not defending criminals. They do their time, and then that's it, and that's the way it should be.
I'm sorry, I just want to ask the panel one big concern about the money of this measure. Could you, the panel, say some words about the cost, the calculation that was already done? Please.
All right, so last question, I guess.
I didn't quite hear you.
Should I go back to talk?
Oh, the cost.
pretty much. I mean, it's
It's a
not,
very complex issue to take in 5 minutes,
yeah,
but
you know it better than I.
there's been a lot of writing on it. I think we've kind of resolved it in the media and the rest, but the person who did the estimates admitted it was a baseline that was arbitrary, and, you know, based on a certain number of arrests or something. I'm not even quite sure where they got that, the sheriff, but the only thing that's required of the sheriff is 2 semi-annual reports, which, by what was reported in Loco today, is pretty similar to what's already required under SB 54, the California Trust Act. So we just don't see where the expenses are, in it, and we've made that point. We've hit the media on that issue, and I think we've really discussed it, and I'm actually happy to move on to more substantive matters of the policy, because I think we've kind of resolved that, and the media has, it really isn't that expensive at all, if anything.
Can we clarification on the numbers?
We-
That,
oh,
just like, I know that the sheriff had released a number and then the committee found out that it was a different number. Can you repeat the difference within the cost?
Well, the Asian Law Caucus looked at it and said that the cost for everything would be pretty minimal. Most of it's redundant with other state law. That we don't add much. Maybe the DHS if it takes its charge seriously to help reunify parents, might have to spend a little bit of money, but that's money well spent. Other than that, this is really just a paper thing. How much does it cost to not call this? I mean, it's really, that's the thing. It's, you know, anyway, but that's, well, we've had this discussion, and I think it's pretty much resolved. I don't think it will decide the election on November 6th.
Well, I just want to thank everyone for coming out today. I know this was very important to central government and for supporters of Measure K. To the sheriff, thank you as well for coming and being open to discussing this. It's a little unfortunate that, at least to me, it seems that you came in here with a set mind. You weren't here to openly discuss and maybe even sway a little to support Measure K. That's the only unfortunate thing. But to everyone else, thank you so much. Thank you, Sheriff. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, everyone, for coming and supporting Measure K. Over its vote yes on Measure K.
Thank you, Monica, Eric, Linda. No panel, everyone. I mean, it's yeah, maybe a little awkward being in the seat up here, you know, with you know, a lot of tough questions and a lot of, you know, there's some hostility. You know, people are passionate about this topic, okay? And I will continue to talk, and I will continue to have relationship and try to build trust when Measure K either passes or fails. Okay, it doesn't matter to me as far as my commitment to the community, no matter what part of the community it is I want to build trust. And so that's going to continue on no matter what. And I appreciate everyone's dialogue here, I appreciate everyone's passion and drive, and we'll continue to have this. I'm not afraid of having tough discussions, I'm not afraid of having disagreements, different opinions. We're not always going to agree, but I think as an example, what we should show Washington DC, okay, and Sacramento, is that despite the fact that we have different opinions, we still can have mutual respect, and we still talk to each other with respect. And I think that's what we should carry on, no matter what passes. And so I appreciate the panel, I appreciate everyone being here, and I appreciate everyone's willingness to express their opinion. Thank you.
I just want to end it by saying that this entire time we've been talking about hope, how to create change, where do we go from here? The sheriff wants to learn lessons, and I think we can look back at our history and learn these lessons. Seeing the internment camps the Native Americans had to suffer through, seeing internment camps the Japanese had to suffer through. I think we've learned our lesson when it comes to putting children in cages. I think we've talked enough about how to change this type of fear tactic. I think now is the time for action. Now is the time for us to come together as a community, as a whole, and say that we all matter. That if we want to see safer places, then we need to have everyone have a voice. November is going to be monumental. It's going to be historic for Humboldt County when we pass Measure K, because we are going to say that yes, we support every member of our community. Every voice matters, and we will move forward to the future instead of just talking about things. actionable change in Humboldt County. Yes on Measure K. Thank you.
We want to thank Daisy Supply Wonderland Nursery, and the Community Center, the Cheerful Building Center, the Tory Movement, Community Farm, Community Center, all right, Larry, Paul,
I gotta talk to my friend.